At this hour, millions of voters across the country are still lined up at their polling centers in what's been an unprecedented campaign, highlighting the major differences in a deeply divided America. 86 million Americans, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, already casting ballots before today, either in person or by mail. Let's go right to the map tonight. The polls still open across most of the country. Just after 7 p.m., as I mentioned here in the East, polls are now closed in those 6 states, including the critical Georgia battleground, won by President Biden in 2020 by about 11,000 votes. Here's where we start tonight. Donald Trump with 8 electoral votes, Kamala Harris with 3. There are 7 states you're going to hear a lot about over and over again tonight, our battleground states, the 7 states that will likely decide the Electoral College. Based on polling over the past several weeks leading right up to election night, they are all extremely close as we begin to count the votes across this country. The Democrats in the so-called blue wall of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, they're trying to hold on to that tonight. In the Southeast, Georgia and North Carolina, and in the Southwest, all eyes on Arizona and Nevada. And of course, here is the magic number we'll be talking about all night here and perhaps for days. 270, the number of electoral votes needed to win the presidency. And it's not just about the White House being at stake tonight. Control of Congress also on the line. Take a look. The Senate right now, as you know, where Democrats are in control of the Senate. Currently, they have narrow control, 34 seats in play tonight. Republicans need to pick up just 2 seats to take back a majority and control. Of course, only 1 seat if Donald Trump wins. The vice president would then have a vote. In the House, it's the Republicans currently control all 435 seats up for grabs. Democrats tonight, remember this number, they need just 4 seats to flip the House. Can either party pull this off tonight? And a reminder, we may not be able to project a winner tonight in the presidential race. Of course, that's okay. We're used to that in this country. It doesn't mean there's a problem. It just means the ballots are still being counted in what is already expected to be a very close election. Our powerhouse political team is here to break this down. They're all in the room with me tonight. Lindsay Davis here at the desk, Mark the Raditz, Mary Bruce, John Carl, Rachel Scott, Rick Klein over at the big board, and all of our experts here, Terry Moran, our analyst, Pierre Thomas, Aaron Katursky, our legal team standing by too, should anything come up over the course of the night. Take a look across the country tonight, fanned out in all the battleground states, our team tracking all of the key races for you. We're going to be with you all night. We'll be here for several nights if that's what it takes as these results come in. Lindsay Davis, the first results come in from these exit polls, which are very revealing about what might be driving voters. I know this is early. These are preliminary exit polls, but what do they show so far?
Sure, and very interesting when you're thinking about what motivated voters as they mark their ballots. It may come as a surprise to some. Take a look. Number 1 issue, state of democracy. Now, why this is a bit surprising is, David, as you know, for months, the polls have suggested in recent weeks and months that the economy was the number 1 issue. But here we see the economy, the second place issue here. Now, it's too early to know the impact of that, but it is certainly significant to note. Followed by abortion, then immigration, and a distant 5th, foreign policy. Now, when we talk about democracy in the United States being on the line, look at this, a whopping 73%. We're talking about 3/4 nearly of those registered voters, again, in preliminary exit polls, these numbers could change, but 73% saying that they feel democracy in this country is threatened. Now, that can cut both ways because, of course, this has been the closing argument for Kamala Harris in recent rallies, saying democracy is on the line. But Donald Trump has been suggesting the same, obviously, for different reasons. Also significant to point out favorability. Donald Trump underwater by 10 points here. You see unfavorability rating for him, 54%, only 44% favorable. While on the flip side, Kamala Harris only underwater by 2 points with a 50% unfavorability, 48% favorable. Now, favorability does not a president make. Just ask Hillary Clinton. 2016, she actually had a higher favorability rating than Donald Trump. And we know how that ended.
It's so interesting that those first early results show that democracy and the state of affairs in this country ranks number 1. Again, preliminary exit polls. I want to head over to the big board. Rachel Scott, going to be at these boards all night long. And if I remember 4 years ago, I think you guys were around until Saturday, but I don't want to freak you out just yet. But Rick, I want to talk about this because we have early vote numbers. Obviously, Republicans and Democrats had significant early vote. I've been obsessed because I've talked to you about this being obviously Kamala Harris's quickest path to 270 right through the Rust Belt. She holds the narrowest of margins in the early vote. She will still need a major turnout on Election Day. The Trump campaign very aware of that, and they're expecting a major turnout today as well. If she's not able to pull off this Rust Belt, this sweep of these 3 states, How do you get there if you're a Kamala Harris?
Yeah, that is the most straightforward path. You're right. There are other ways that she gets there, but it really means some combination of those Midwestern states and some Southern states. One possibility would be if she's able to hold on to Wisconsin and Michigan and take one of these two Southern states potentially and then the Western states. But it's much harder if Pennsylvania falls that way. And you mentioned those early votes. Of course, they're going to be supplemented with actual vote counting as the night goes on, but it's going to take a while.
Take me to the other board of the column of the point system, where you actually literally see when you take some of these states in different columns over the course of the night. Let's, for example, and it's early night, so we can do this, some hypotheticals for you at home. If Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania, what does it do to her odds of winning the presidency?
Yeah, our partners at 538 say it's about a 50-50 night going in. But if Pennsylvania goes to Kamala Harris, check out what happens to the numbers. Suddenly it shoots up to almost 85% likelihood of her winning. Now, if Pennsylvania goes the other way, if Donald Trump is able to solve that again and make it fall in his column, he's now an 80% favorite. So that is the state that puts you in a commanding position if you win it.
And I think that I read the person who wins Pennsylvania wins the White House 90% of the time in our history of these presidential races. In the meantime, we can call Indiana, the state of Indiana, the first state of this hour to call, going to Donald Trump. And it's 11 electoral votes. Donald Trump gets the state of Indiana tonight. Rick, you've got the early vote numbers. Let's take a look at them because they're a little different this time of year, this time around. And I wanted to explain to our viewers, 4 years ago, we were in the pandemic, right? We're in the middle of COVID. People were being encouraged to vote early, particularly on the Democratic side. Donald Trump did not embrace early voting. He actually questioned it. This time he has said go out and vote early, and it would appear Republican supporters of Donald Trump listened.
Yeah, look, last time 100 million Americans voted early. That's a record, but only about a third of them were actually Republicans. Now that number is up to 38%, and that's just 2 points below the Democrats. So think about that. Republicans were running 10 points behind Democrats 4 years ago. Now that is only 2 points. This is a big factor as well. That's the 22% of unaffiliated. They're either independent or third-party candidates, or they don't identify with any party. We don't know where they're going to break tonight.
Sort of a black box. We have no idea how that number breaks down, and that's a significant number. And if you're inside each one of the campaigns, you're doing modeling and focus groups that shows which way the wave is breaking in these final days. Perhaps these campaigns have a much better idea than we do tonight watching this unfold. What does this mean, though, when it comes to the Republican turnout? It is impressive. The question that the Harris camp is going to put out there is, are these the voters who would have turned out for Donald Trump on Election Day, or was able to bank this vote and then get a whole new crop of Republican voters today?
That's exactly the question. And Georgia is actually instructive in this way, because you can see in 2020, Republicans were about 40% of the electorate. They're only about 39% now. It's about the same. It isn't a huge difference, a slightly fewer Democrats as a share. This is fascinating, though, to me, because you talk about those unaffiliated voters. This is the portrait in North Carolina, where we're going to have polls closing soon. 4.5 million people voting early, almost as many as last time. And that is a third Democrats, a third Republicans, and a third, the largest share actually, are those unaffiliated voters.
It's interesting you bring up North Carolina. I'll take this over to Rachel then, because one of the things that you and I have been talking about these last 24 hours, it was hard not to notice that Donald Trump spent a lot of time in North Carolina in these last 2 days.
Spending a whole lot of time in North Carolina. And David, I was talking to one Republican who told me where these candidates are spending their final days will tell you a lot about what they are particularly concerned about. So North Carolina, a state that Donald Trump won in 2016 and 2020, it's the only battleground state tonight where the former president is on defense. He held 4 campaign stops here in the last 3 days, campaigning in Kinston, Greenville, Raleigh, Greensboro, also over here in Charlotte. David, as the night goes on, as we start to get results, we're also going to be paying attention to this area right here in the western part of the state. This is an area that was really hit hard by Hurricane Helene. Former President Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020 really racked up the vote in the rural parts of that state.
Was there something within the campaign that they were seeing that made them nervous out in the early vote? But of course, we just learned that in the last 24 hours. But essentially, these two campaigns are tied going into Election Day in North Carolina. And as Rick pointed out, and rightly so, a whole third of the early vote is either independent or unaffiliated voters. And we simply don't know how that's going to break.
Part of this showing just how tight this race is. No Democrat has won the state of North Carolina since 2008. To give this up. The other half of it, of course, is the fact that Hurricane Helene really ravaged parts of this state. Trump voters in rural counties, they need them to turn out. Now, there have been modifications that have been made, provisional votes that will be cast in some of those counties as well.
Let's talk about where Kamala Harris spent her final 24 hours. He did sort of a blitz of 3 battleground states. She was in 1 state alone.
1 state alone, Pennsylvania. The biggest prize of the night, 19 electoral votes. We're going to keep coming back to all important Pennsylvania because you heard from Rick just how much her chances increase if she were to win this state. So, David, let me show you where she was campaigning. Part of it was the Latino belt. Allentown and Reading, high Hispanic and Latino voters here. In Allentown, Puerto Rican community, very large here, really seizing on those comments made at Donald Trump's Madison Square Garden rally. A speaker comparing Puerto Rico to an island of garbage, really trying to turn out the vote here. She went door knocking in Scranton, home to President Biden, of course. She also campaigned all the way over here in Pittsburgh, which is really notable, David, because Joe Biden in 2020 got more votes than any other Democrat in Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, since LBJ in 1964. And then, of course, she held that final star-studded rally right there in Philadelphia.
It's interesting, in the midterms 2 years ago, Republicans got the most votes out of Allegheny County. Even though it's a Democratic county with Pittsburgh, got the most votes there, too. So the Trump campaign does not want to give up that territory either. Pennsylvania, we're going to be talking about Pennsylvania here all night long and probably beyond tonight. John Carl, I know that you just talked to Donald Trump late this afternoon. You talked to sources in the Trump campaign, also the Harris campaign. How are they feeling going into this night with all these national polls showing it's a coin flip? It's basically tied going in.
Look, David, both sides are projecting optimism. They're saying they've got confidence that they ultimately are going to win, but both are clearly on edge about this, clearly uneasy about where this is going to go. And in my conversation with Donald Trump, very interesting conversation because, you know, he's always, I'm going to win, I'm going to win, I'm going to win. I asked him how he reads these early returns, the early votes, the last polls. And this is what he said, exact quote, "I don't know. We've had a lot of enthusiasm, but I cannot read it, and I don't think anybody can read it." Kind of exhausted, clearly exhausted after this final push, and a little bit very uncharacteristic for Donald Trump, throwing his arms up and saying, "Look, I don't really know where this race stands."
I think it's a moment of truth and real clarity from Donald Trump to you,
Yes,
John Carl, because
absolutely.
honestly, people who've studied
We don't
this.
know.